fantasy short stories. Of Monsters and Mushrooms by Lesley Herron. Chapter 2, Oversized Pizza Toppings. Cardio is key to a healthy heart, but oftentimes it's difficult to find the motivation to actually go for a jog. Nobody likes running, and anyone who says otherwise is crazy or trying to impress someone. Luckily, Attila had stumbled upon the perfect motivator to get his whole week's worth of cardio done in a single day. Running full tilt through a forest of deadwood, trees-turned-mushrooms in an attempt to avoid becoming an abyss walker's afternoon snack was nothing if not motivating. But as he stumbled over a root, pirouetted through a giant spiderweb, complete with spider, and somersaulted through a thick patch of crimson clover, face-planting into a foul-smelling fungal pod, he decided there were easier ways to stay healthy. Not that he needed it. He was a paragon of manliness, after all.
"I want it on record."
Briggs skid to a stop, one hand holding his top hat in place on his shiny head, the other clutching at a stitch in his side.
"That I suggested we go back to the Bitter Bullet and find some other bounty."
Flinging goopy, thick tendrils of mushroom slime from his face, Attila pried himself free and back to his feet. "Duly noted. Now keep running."
"Wait."
Brig held up a hand in between gasps.
"I think we lost it."
Over the sound of their labored breathing, silence had returned to the dead forest, blanketing them with an uncertain relief. Attila danced on the spot, checking behind them. The only sign of movement through the trees was their own. "You might be right, but do you really want to hang around here and find out?"
"Maybe,"
Brig wheezed, filling his lungs with gulps of musty, ashy air before he straightened up, digging his fingers into that screaming muscle cramp in his side.
"But I'm not sure I can take another step, though."
Having the perfect remark for just such a moment, Attila opened his mouth to respond when a crack split the silence and the two of them screamed. He took off like a bolt of lightning, only to be surpassed by Brig with a speed he'd never seen before. "How come you can't move like that all the time?" The murk was gone before he finished his question. It's a common misconception that large men can't run fast. Quite the contrary, actually, assuming they don't skip leg day. Which, admittedly, Brig often did. The problem with being so large is that it takes a lot more energy. Energy that must be accrued through eating, something Attila never let him do. Sprinting faster than a speeding bullet presented other problems. He couldn't really see where he was going. He nearly didn't register the lumpy mass crouching in his path as it shifted toward him. Time slowed as two glassy black eyes above a crimson-red beak turned to greet him. Unable to stop or change direction, Brig had barely managed to raise a leg in time before he collided with the mushroom-covered beast. It screamed as his knee careened into its stomach, then his foot planted firmly between its legs, and he stomped forward, transferring most of his momentum into the monster. Time resumed with a thickening crunch as the creature flew back, pinballing off several spongy mushroom trunks before landing with a pained cry against the base of a giant deadwood tree. Brig stumbled forward, throwing out his hands to catch his balance, and spun to face the beast. He shifted into a boxer stance, ready to defend himself. Skidding to a stop at the end of the destruction path, Attila stared wide-eyed at a groaning lump of mushrooms. Veronica casually shoved a rusty old pistol into his hand. Apparently she didn't like the look of it either. "What the hell is that thing?" He took aim, flipping the safety off, and pulled back on the hammer.
"Wait!"
The creature threw one of its hands into the air, revealing itself to be rather humanoid.
"Don't shoot!"
It used its other hand to rip the red-beaked gas mask off its face. and Attila lowered the gun as he watched. It was a man. Well, man-ish. Rather, a guy approaching middle age, with long pointed ears that sat drooped beneath a heavy felt hat. He had dark black hair with a shock of white that hung over a narrow pair of glasses, emphasizing the blue eyes that sat just behind them. His ratty outfit was comprised of several burlap bags stitched together and covered in what looked like hastily crocheted mushrooms, the kind one would find at a craft fair, except ugly and poorly made. Brig, having cautiously approached, moved over the man, squinting down into his face.
"What the hell are you doing out in these woods dressed like a whatever you're supposed to be?" "I was..."
The man gulped down air, struggling to retain any mental acuity after having his avocados guacamole'd.
"Studying spore migrations in conjunction with the movement of reported cryptid sightings."
His mustache twitched in disbelief, but at the very least, Brig could tell this man was harmless. He extended a meaty palm down to the stranger.
"Oh, huh."
Brig frowned.
"What?"
Now sitting, instead of standing, the man waved a dismissive hand.
"Nothing. It's just, you looked different from down there."
The big man was massive, nearly as wide as he was tall, a feat that would have been more impressive had he actually been tall to begin with. It would have been generous to say he stood at 5 foot with his boots on. Brig released him with a petulant huff. Fumbling back into the dirt, the stranger rolled to his side and began to climb to his feet. He dusted off his poncho, rearranged his mushrooms, and extended his own hand with a smile.
"My name is Eric."
"I'm Attila." Disarming his weapon, the merc offered it back to Veronica for safekeeping and gestured to his friend. "And this here pouting boulder is my good buddy Brig." Shaking the man's hand in return, he paused, with a frown to take in the ratty amalgamation of odd fashion choices. "As a poncho aficionado myself, I must say yours is... unique."
"What, this?"
Eric looked down at his clothes, and then back up with his own frown.
"It hides me from the grime golems."
He bent down, snatching up his discarded mask.
"The better question is, what are you guys doing this far into the Deadwoods?" "We're running from..."
Attila flung out his hand, interrupting Brig with a flurried wave of fingers, and corrected, "We were running down a bounty." He looked over each shoulder before planting his hands firmly on his hips with a defeated sigh. "But I think it got away. Darn."
"Well, you two should be careful. I've been tracking something dangerous in these woods."
Eric reached beneath his poncho and pulled out a small journal. He snapped the rubber band holding it closed and gestured to the trees with it.
"Rumor is it's an abyss walker, but I'm not so sure about that."
"Hey, wait a minute! That's our bounty! We saw it first!" In the middle of flipping through the crammed pages of his tiny notebook, Eric paused mid-finger-lick to look up at the odd pair.
"Wait, you saw it?"
He marched closer, eyes wide with the hunger for knowledge.
"What did it look like?"
He produced a pen from behind a mushroom cluster on his hat and placed it to a fresh page.
How big was it? Did it have any distinguishing features? Could you tell its gender?"
Sticking a tongue between his teeth in thought, Attila screwed up his face and recalled, "It was about 12 or 13 feet tall, black, inky and shiny like oil, amorphous. Didn't get a good look at its undercarriage, but it's got a human skull for a face and antlers with lots of points." Eric, rushing to scribble down all these details, shook his head.
"Fascinating. How many points?"
It was Brig that responded with a confident, if not stressed,
13.
With a scoff, Attila gave his friend a withering look. How would you know? You were facing the wrong way the entire time. Swallowing hard, Brig lifted a hand to gesture at something behind their new associate.
Because I can count 'em from here.
Pen paused in the midst of writing the number 13. Eric slowly straightened out his back and glanced over his shoulder. Sure enough, it was just as described, down to the gooey eye sockets. As if summoned by their discussion, the very same creature stood less than 20 paces away, its human skull face cocked to one side, not moving, just staring.
Oh, what was it doing when you guys found it?
He lowered his voice to a whisper as he began inching toward the pair. Snacking on grime golems? Eric was about to suggest that they keep backing away from the monster, but it apparently had other plans. It let out a high-pitched shrill, its entire body vibrating and undulating as it did, before lurching into motion. Run! The three of them bolted back the way they had come, scrambling over one another to be the first to leave. With a start, Attila realized how the creature had tracked them so easily. While he had flown through the forest like a graceful gazelle, Brig had left a trail of destruction like a lumbering rhino. The good news was, if they continued this way, they'd eventually make it back to their vehicle. That, and most of the hazards had already been smashed out of the way the first time that dapper wrecking ball plowed through here. The bad news was most of the hazards had already been smashed out of the way the first time that dapper wrecking ball plowed through here, and apparently the creature was faster over open ground. Veronica, I need a distraction! He extended his hand, and the machine supplied him with what it determined to be the best option from his poncho's vast inventory. A metallic cylinder plopped into his palm, and without looking, Attila reached for the pin. He wasn't sure exactly what type of grenade this was. He carried over half a dozen varieties at any given time. But something explodey, regardless of payload, was better than nothing, right? He tossed it over his shoulder and shouted, "Fire in the hole!" Both Brig and Eric looked back at him in surprise, just in time to witness the explosion. The loud bang practically shattered the quiet of the forest, but it was the flare of magnesium light that burst through the deadwoods like a detonated sun. Their adversary reeled with a screech, thin, brittle arms appearing to claw at the eyeless holes of the skull in its head as it crumpled to the ground in agony. Success! Well, mostly. The three of them were now also reeling from the white-hot supernova of light just as much as the monster. Eric careened blindly into the trunk of the nearest deadwood, then bounced off the rubbery stalk of a mushroom tree. He ripped the glasses from his face to paw away the pops of color in his vision. What the hell was that? Having a cybernetic eye meant Attila was quickest to recover. He slid the patch over to his normal eye and allowed Veronica to highlight his surroundings. It worked, didn't it? The Abyss Walker had gave its skeletal head a shake, the whole thing sinking into its gooey body before resurfacing like the dice in some macabre magic 8-ball. Brig, arms stretched out protectively in front of him, slammed his shins into a downed branch and toppled.
No, Attila, it did not.
The floating skull turned in his direction, and Attila stumbled back. Not good. Not good at all. He hated to do this, but it was better than being a meal for a goo beast. He clamped his eyes shut and focused. There, behind his thoughts, a torrential river of noise ran. With a grimace, he dove in, nearly losing himself in the current of information. Thoughts bubbled up in fully formed concepts, mathematical calculations, and probabilistic trajectories. Making sense of it all was like sucking on a live wire while trying to sing the national anthem backwards. Then it clicked. "I've got a plan!" Attila hauled his friend upright, then shoved him in the direction of their new associate. "You two run that way!" He spun on his heel. "And I'ma run this way!" He grit his teeth, knowing full well just how much this was going to hurt. He leapt into action, closing his eyes and running straight forward, screaming out a victorious war cry. "For glory!" Then his face slammed into the nearest mushroom-encrusted, rotted redwood tree, striking into a weak point of the trunk. Despite its titanic size, the dent in its surface began to crumble, sending webs of cracks across the rotted surface, and it wobbled angrily. Attila shook the fuzziness from his brain when the first fungi-laden branch fell from high above, crashing to the ground in front of him. Then another. Losing only a single drop of pee, he turned and fled. The Abyss Walker was on his heels, being pelted by the rain of falling debris. He zigged this way and zagged that way until the tree Attila introduced to his forehead fully collapsed. The resulting shockwave from the crumbling skyscraper lifted him off his feet and flung him forward as giant mushrooms and rotting deadwoods toppled all around them in the most dangerous game of dominoes the world had ever seen. Just outside the ring of destruction, Brig and Eric watched in awe as Attila ducked, spun, and salcowed his way towards them in the rain of chaos. So graceful. That is, until a particularly floppy mushroom cap landed on him with a squelch and pinned him to the ground. But it worked. The Abyss Walker was sure to be buried by several tons of decayed wood. Brig recovered first, hauled his buddy free of his spongy prison, and began accosting him with his fists. "You!" Punch. "Giant!" Slap. "Buffoon!" Ear pull. "You could have killed us!" Fending off each hit as best he could, Attila winced and shied away. "What? It worked out exactly as I planned." He turned over his shoulder, squinting at the massive black puddle of goo that spread out from beneath the oversized pizza toppings. "Now we just have to dig out its corpse and collect the bounty." "Exactly as you planned, Eric shoved his glasses back on his face, giving the pair a scrutinizing look. "I take it this," he gestured to their destroyed surroundings, "happens a lot around you guys?" Attila lifted a finger to respond, to defend his honor, but the pile of forest gave a violent tremor as the Abyss Walker beneath it began to reform. He swallowed his pride on a dime and formulated a new ingenious plan. "Run!" Nearly jumping off its hinges, a door crashed inward and 3 wild and manic bodies spilled inside, practically piling atop one another as they fought to not be the last one through. Eric scrabbled to his feet, shoes slipping on the dusty tiles, to slam the door closed. The other 2 followed, using their strength to help fight the rusty hinges. Silence permeated the dark, but the 3 of them held their collective breath as they pressed their ears against the wooden surface and waited, listening. None of them had looked back, opting to follow Eric's lead. And now the sounds that had haunted their steps had grown faint, the distant screams and frustrated howls slipping through the cracks. Eventually, the sounds faded until only the heavy silence of the room remained, and the 3 of them released a collective sigh of relief. Eric pulled away from the door, hand scouring the walls for the light switch. "All right, guys, come on in, make yourselves at home."
"That was too dang close."
Turning his attention to Attila, Brig was about to berate his buddy for getting them into this when dim, flickering halogen light began to creep across the room. In the stark illumination, he could see one wall was filled with shuttered windows covered up in old newsprint, leaving the only source of light to buzz loudly from above. 2 large metal operating tables sat near the far wall, which itself seemed to be a collection of, horizontal meat lockers? Surgical tools cluttered about every inch of counter space, even encroaching onto the surface of those metallic tables. And he swallowed hard. Dangling from beneath a wadded-up sheet was a limp arm from shoulder to fingertip. Like the icing on a gruesome cake, everything was splattered in dirty red stains. "You okay there, man? You're looking a little pale." Attila squinted his good eye at the normally dark-skinned merc when the flickering halogens finally achieved their full warmth, spreading bright, luminescent light about the room.
Yeah, just, how about we make this the last time we trust random strangers in the middle of spooky forests, all right?
"Why do you say that?" His expression flickered through several stages of disbelief, ranging from anger to, "Are you kidding me?" as Brig grabbed Attila by the shoulder and spun him around to face the torture devices hanging from the ceiling.
Home sweet home.
Letting that ball of panic in his gut loosen, Eric sighed in relief as he turned back toward the boys. His cheery demeanor evaporated, however, when he faced not the thankful mugs of the 2 mercs he'd just saved, but rather the barrels of their guns.
Oh, come on!
His hands lifted into the air as confusion settled in.
I thought we were cool, that we bonded over running for our lives.
Thank you for saving us and all, but, Attila gestured to the door with his free hand. "We're gonna be taking our leave. You're gonna have to find 2 other idiots to play Mad Doctor with."
What?
Eric's bewilderment transformed into slow realization. His eyes flickered around the room, strewn about with the remnants of his last patient.
No. It's not like that at all.
He let out a nervous chuckle, seeing that that's exactly how it looked.
I'm not some hermit murder hobo.
He shuffled to the far side of the room, keeping his hands in the air as he skirted around all the evidence to the contrary. Eric reached up and turned on the overhead lamp, adjusting it to illuminate the scene. In better light, the bloodstains became oil spatters. The terrifying array of saws and scalpels became basic repair tools, and the wadded-up sheets were actually rags used to soak up grease from the tables. The severed arm turned out to be a mechanical prosthetic in the beginning stages of overhaul. The dangling weapons from the ceiling were only corded power tools, and not a single knife, dagger, or meat cleaver could be seen anywhere. Attila's gun lowered as his eyebrows rose. He nearly tripped over his own feet in his haste to snatch up that mechanical arm, tossing his hand cannon to the side.
Is this a Radial Gripmaster X3?
They only made, 200 of these bad boys.
Good eye.
Eric nodded, his smile a little forced when he noticed Brig still had his weapon leveled on him.
I was a cyberneticist in my previous life. A choice I didn't get to make, but that's neither here nor there. You could have anything in them meat lockers.
Brig narrowed his gaze through the sight of his firearm, giving his mustache a doubtful twitch.
Why would anyone set up a cyber-what-you-call-it shop in the middle of nowhere using an abandoned morgue?
Cyberneticist, Eric corrected.
And technically, it's true, but...
He pulled open one of the mortuary cabinets, and random bits and bobs cascaded free. broken circuits, short lengths of wire, scraps of metal, and so many tiny screws. Where else am I going to find this much storage? Besides, after I ended up here, there were lots of people nearby, and with doctors in short supply, I started getting all sorts coming to me for help. Hunters, prospectors, he gestured to the pair, mercenaries. Business has been booming, you could say. I stitch up what I can, or replace what I can't. This facility is perfect for that. A giggle pulled Eric's attention to the half-repaired mechanical arm, which Attila had pried open and was digging around inside with a mini screwdriver. Please don't touch that. Brig quirked a brow, his sidearm lowering a hair.
Fair enough, but that don't explain what you was doing out there with that abyss walker.
I already told you what I was doing out there, and that's not an abyss walker. Eric, sensing the fading distrust in the merc, proceeded to open a door off to his left and waved them both to follow.
Here, I'll show you.
On his way across the room, Brig bopped Attila on the head.
Idiot. Next time we're holding someone at gunpoint, try not to get distracted by something shiny.
But it's a radial grip, Master X3! Attila rubbed at the sore spot on his noggin.
If I wake up with a missing kidney, or end up having my bone marrow sucked out, I'll never forgive you.
Brig glared at his friend, who sheepishly replaced the arm with his pistol, and the pair of them fell in line, following the so-called cyberneticist through the door and into a plush living space. A desk, nearly collapsing beneath the weight of dozens of hefty tomes and mountains of paperwork, sat in the middle of the room. 3 of the 4 walls were hidden behind countless bookcases, each shelf bowed with age and lined with heavy boxes, glass jars, dusty books, mushroom samples, fancy-looking gizmos, and even a few skulls, several of which looked at least semi-humanoid. In front of the empty wall, a rolling corkboard stood, filled with hundreds of images of cryptids, ranging from bunyips and other sea monsters to Bigfoot and Wendigos. Red yarn connected each blurry photograph or rough sketch to a supporting newspaper clipping. Removing his top hat reverently, Brig stepped up to the conspiracy board and sucked back the tear that tried to escape. It was beautiful. Eric moved around the room, reaching up to a top shelf of one of the bookcases, and pulled down a large pickle jar. Hefting it, he used his hips to shove a stack of papers off his desk and gently banged the container into the newly cleaned spot. This, he clicked on the lamp, casting the creature inside in sharp relief,
is an abyss walker.
Taking a cautionary step closer, Attila tapped the glass with his shooter and squinted at the thing sloshing around in the green, murky water. It was black and inky, but unlike the thing that chased them down, this was just a little guy. It kind of resembled a slug without the eye stalks. The blob sucked at the lid of the jar in a vain attempt to escape.
An abyss walker is an organism that evolved from the fallout to eat the radiation in the swamps.
Eric, realizing he was no longer in danger of being shot, removed his mushroom poncho and fungi hat, tossing them onto the desk chair.
They're basically mutated slime molds. Creepy as hell? Absolutely. Dangerous? No. You could outrun them with a brisk walk. And the only way they can kill you, since they have no teeth, is to suffocate you in your sleep, which would never happen. So I think it's safe to say that thing out there, he paused, pointing back towards the main door, is something new, something unique. Turning away from the glorious pinboard, Brig frowned. That ain't what we heard. Abyss walkers are supposed to be kinda nightmare creatures.
With a shrug, Eric nodded.
If you woke up to one of these guys crawling up your leg, would you say you wet yourself because of a sentient snot bubble, or make up some fantastical story about barely escaping with your life? Most cryptid sightings turn out to be just tall tales getting taller with each telling.
Brig grunted.
Kinda like the time Attila fought off a razor bear.
Hey, that mutated chihuahua was huge! Attila, unnerved by the slug blob thing, began scanning around the room for something else to look at, when he noticed one corner was piled high with boxes. And I do mean boxes. Each crate filled with ammunition, random weapons. Is that a rare splattercaster pulse rifle? And all the dried rations Brig could eat in a lifetime. This quack is loaded! He glanced back at the odd man with a curious half-smile. You sure seem to know a lot about this. Eric turned back to the board, pointing at several different pages.
I've never encountered anything on this world with a similar morphology. That thing doesn't fit the environment and has no natural predators.
He pulled out his stuffed notebook and ripped free the page with his quickly scribbled notes on the beast to pin it next to the image he had pulled from a wanted poster.
It's invasive, and it's migrating from somewhere more hostile.
Spotting his compatriot relieving the good doctor of some excess inventory, Brig stepped up to help distract the gentleman.
More hostile than the Deadwoods, you say? Ain't possible.
Exactly. Eric flipped the stringboard over, revealing a detailed map of the ashlands and the wastes tacked on the reverse. Red X's littered the paper, and he pointed to each one.
These are all the listed sightings, the oldest dating back 6 months ago.
He grabbed a marker and added another X to the edge of the Deadwoods. He then began to connect them with a growing spiral, circling the only town within the radius.
Based on this, I think it originated from Pale Point.
Paused in the middle of his pilfering, Attila straightened up, his sticky-fingered hands laden with ammo. Pale Point? That place has been abandoned for years. There's nothing left out there.
Yeah, and ain't no one traveling there. Not in a decade, and not since them worms moved in.
Eric nodded.
True, but it was home to a portal. So?
Brig gave the doctor a quizzical look.
You know all them portal things closed like, 10 years ago?
Oh, I am very aware. Eric gave him a pained smile. Actually, it had been 9 years, 2 months, and 13 days since the last rift closed. But who was counting?
I'm sure one opened back up, because whatever that thing is, it came from another realm, and recently.
A portal? A flash of an idea whizzed through Attila's mind, and he dropped the sizzle-matic cattle prod he found back into the massive shipping crate at his feet. Everyone knew the portals had all closed. Just one day, poof, gone. People were stranded, trade and travel cut off. Even on their world, the result had been an economic nuke, in some ways worse than the war. Finding a working rift could be worth, well, more than all the casings in the wastes. Licking the drool from his lips, he reached out and grabbed his buddy by the shoulder, dragging him aside. Just a moment, please. I need to confer with my friend here. Attila dropped to a squat, so Brig only had to lean a bit to be ear to ear, and whispered, Did you hear that? This guy thinks there's a portal out there.
Attila? No.
Brig, you're not listening. A portal means wealth. Loads of it. Tons of it. we'd be set for life. Our children's grandchildren would want for nothing. Flapjacks as far as the eye can see.
Assuming it exists. Even I think this guy's crazy. Besides, we don't know nothing about cryptids or portal hunting. How are we supposed to find it?
I got that covered. Attila stood, and Veronica deposited his gun into his hand once more. He marched across the room with the wild look of a hungry man, or brig, at a buffet. He used the end of his pistol to tap against the circled city on the map several times. Tell you what, Eric. Attila pulled a menacing grin across his face. You're gonna hand over all that ammo. He nodded to the hope chest piled with an assortment of bullets. Then take us to this portal. And in return, he splayed his hands out to his side in an inviting gesture. Nothing bad happens to ya. Capiche?
Really?
Eric scratched at the base of his neck before a silly smile crossed his face.
I never thought to hire bodyguards. That's a great idea.
He turned back to the board, studying it and throwing a distractive wave to the chest by his feet.
Take the ammo, please. I hate guns anyway. I have no idea how you guys stand to use it as currency here.
He visibly shivered, then began to pace back and forth.
All right, we can leave pretty much immediately, but I need to get some things together. And we'll have to make a detour real quick. But no worries, it's on the way and it won't take long. I promise.
He clapped the lanky merc on the shoulder and gave him a wide grin.
Thank you.
As the doctor practically bounded towards a supply closet, Attila turned to Brig with a cheeky set of thumbs-ups and a wide grin. This was gonna be an easy payday. Thank you for listening to Of Monsters and Mushrooms, the rewrite of Book 1 by Lesley Herron. Join us as we post new chapters roughly every other week. If you would like to listen to the entire book or her other novels in the series, you can do so at talltale.tv.com/series or by using the link in the description. Look, Brig! A fully augmented semi-auto 50 cal sniper rifle!
Yep, very nice, Attila. Uh-huh. Okay, so, Doc, I noticed you use a cotton poly blend for your yarn. Have you ever considered wool?
No,
I've never tried it. Why? Well, I find wool has a natural springiness to it, but tends to keep its shape even after multiple restringings.
Really? That would be super helpful.
Yup, and it's more durable too, less likely to fray on those thumbtacks you use. Oh, if you want to avoid fraying, I highly recommend getting some of these handcrafted push pins. I got them last time I was in Nova. Total game changer. Handcrafted, eh? Yeah, check out how smooth these are. See? Oh, yeah. The yarn just slides over them like silk, and they are perfect for the cork. Not too thick, not too thin. Now see, that right there. Instead of cork, have you ever tried felt boards? I know, nothing can match the beauty of cork, but felt stands up to... Hey, Attila, what'd I tell you about handling grenades when you're this wound up?
Relax. I know what I'm...
Uh-oh. Attila!
Oh, never mind. False alarm.
I swear
These are just regular grenades.
Son of a...